taxes, and Phil let them talk for a long time. Then he quietly said, the reason your taxes are high is your building is very valuable. And the reason your building is valuable because it can create such an enormous revenue stream. And nobody countered that at all. After Saglin's term was up, one of many, and I kind of lost track of Phil, but reconnected a few years later. You mentioned the convention center, and he was active in that with letters to elected officials, to the newspapers, and so on. In fact, I'm not positive, but I think Phil might get credit for coining the term mistake on the lake. And then again, and I always found Madison interesting because I remember one time, I forget what the issue was, and here's Phil Wall and Fred Wells as a team on a particular issue. And that happened again with the $16 million proposed tax increment finance to the Edgewater. And I was somewhat active in that at the request of several people, including Fred Mose. And Phil had a lot to say about that, and he had some great comments. But we worked a lot together. We never were friends from the standpoint of social work, social activities and so on. But I did always admire the man. I saw Phil about a year and a half before he passed away. I was golfing with several people, including Carl was there, and he said, stop by the house. And we pulled into the house, and I believe Phil recognized me. And that recognition, I think, brought out some other memories that we talked about, events at the city and the various mayors and the activities and so on. It was a good day, and I'm glad you invited us there. Thank you.
I do have to say that Phil knew the levers of power in the city and was not afraid to use it. Amazing, and very good at litigating. So you didn't want to be caught on the wrong side, Phil.
I hadn't planned to talk. I'm Lucy Mathiak, and since we mentioned the Edgewater, I met Phil in '76 when my housemate's dog ran away because she loved Phil. She loved Phil. And I got a call at Nottingham, home of the Revolution, saying, I've got Natasha, could somebody please come get her? And I did. And I met this one, I knew who he was. You could not know who Phil was in Madison. He didn't seek the limelight, but he was a presence. And when he left political life, he became my role. I wanted to be Phil when I grew up. He was such a class act. I wasn't Phil, by a long shot. I was one of the people who raised their voices and frequently in meetings. And in 2006, I had a burst of insanity and ran for the Madison School Board. And I was elected, and that was kind of okay. And then I ended up on the TIF board. And I knew how to read a budget, and I learned some really interesting stuff. I don't know if you guys know this, but for example, State Street and the buildings around the square don't have to pay for the improvements on their sidewalks and curbs. We do, but they don't. That was kind of new information for me. And I also learned that there was this nasty habit of starting the TIF district and then stretching it out so you could do a whole bunch of other stuff, which is great for the city, but if you're a Madison school person trying to build a budget, you're screwed because you're not getting that tax revenue. This is way too much detail. At any rate, there was a proposal to yet again extend one of the districts so that the Edgewater Hotel, home of the elites, could enjoy some nice tax-supported expansion on the taxpayer's dime. Now, it's possible this was personal. I had gone to the Edgewater with a friend of mine, and they wouldn't take our order unless he gave them his credit card first. And I always suspect it was because he's the only black person on the terrace at that time. I was not happy about the finances, and I did not like the Edgewater, and I dug my heels in. And in the midst of all of this, I got these calls from Phil, offering counsel and advice and encouragement. I too sat down and communed with Fred Mose. He actually accidentally ripped a thermometer thing off of my house.
Phil would always, even addressing Fred, he would always call him pretty boy. Because Fred was a very handsome man, but he would always call him pretty boy.
I would never ever call him that.
You got away
Just
with it.
saying, well, Phil was a guy, So it was an honor when he reached out to me because I so admired him and I felt like I was so over my head, but I knew that what I was seeing felt really wrong. And Phil and I had been in touch over the years. We talk about our friend Carly Warley here. I'd see him on his motorcycle, but it was when he reached out on the Edgewater. And then, and we won. By the way, we won that one, if you didn't know. And then we kind of corresponded by email. I left the school board, I left my campus job. I became a nursing assistant because I wanted to do something every day that felt like I was helping somebody. And being an administrator was not that. And I ended up working inpatient on the mental health unit at the VA. And at some point I didn't realize Phil was a vet. He never talked about it. But I told him what I'd been up to since I left the board. Phil was my role model. I walked away, I closed the door, I never looked back, and I never commented because he did what made sense to me. So I let him know what I was doing, and that's when he said that he was a vet. He didn't go into detail about what had happened, but it was clear he still carried that burden. And it opened up a communication between us that forever, he was in my heart before, but that sealed the deal. And then the last I heard from him was when he sent the email saying, "I'm sorry, I haven't been in touch." I've reached out to him, but I never heard back. But what a gift he was to me and to so many of us who are trying to get through the weeds on some stupid policy issue. And there was Phil kind of distilling it all down to where you could work with it and actually win a few. But that'll pass. Whoops. That's the part I do ahead of.
Ivana? Esther.
Yes. So this seems like a good segue to tell the story of how I met Phil. So I'm currently still the Jefferson County Veteran Service Officer. I work at the courthouse. I've been there since February 14th of 2007. And when I was first approached by Phil's people upon his passing, they came into the Veteran Service Office and we began to do some paperwork, and I think it was Carolyn, that was surprised to know that I knew Phil as well as I did. And I have been sitting here going back through, so one of the things that I've done as the County Veteran Service Officer is scanned in 66 filing cabinets, 5-drawer filing cabinets of stuff that was in the Veteran Service Office going back to the Spanish-American War. And so I have a couple things to tell you about that I found in Phil's file. One of them, A People's History, an article that says Some of the authors of the critically acclaimed book, A People's History of the American Empire, will be in Fort Atkinson Saturday for a book signing and discussion at Carpe, all things come full circle. Paul Boulay and Dave Wagner, two of the writers who collaborated with Howard Zinn and Michael Knopacki? Thank you. I can't, it's so small here. Hang on, I gotta turn this so I can read it. I just thought this would be particularly poignant, and it ties into what I'm about to share with you. Let's see, we'll be speaking and signing books from 4:30 to 7:30 p.m. The book has some local ties to Fort Atkinson, as Phil Ball conducted much of the historical research at the Dwight Foster Public Library. He receives the first mention in the acknowledgments portion of the book, A People's History of the American Empire. Serves as a visual adaptation of Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. The graphic novel is described as a study of American expansionism around the world, told from a grassroots perspective, and provides an analysis of important events from Wounded Knee to Iraq. Pictured above, Phil Ball holds a copy of the book at Cafe Carpe. So there we have it. Okay, so I didn't even know that because I hadn't looked through these files. So I wrote a couple sentences here. This photo that you'll note from Carolyn, was it Carolyn that put it on his little paper?
Yeah, the program.
Yes.
Program, yeah.
Okay. So what I'm about to tell you is about this picture and how we got to this. So again, I started this gig on February 14th, 2007. I had to look back. Phil walked into my office on February 21st of 2007. And let's just say he really put me through my paces. I always kind of, when somebody would say, Phil Ball's on the phone for you, I'd be like, oh no. So I wrote these few things to keep me on track. I really did not know Phil Ball very well, but well enough to know that he was an interesting and engaging person. The first time Phil came to my office, I had not been in office very long. I clearly recall the first spirited conversation about the fact that the government cannot be trusted, to which I pointed out that he was in fact talking to the government. But I listened more than I talked, and the second time Phil came into the office, he brought me a copy of Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States for my continued edification. To be honest, Phil was really a pain in the neck, and I soon realized that I was simply part of his plot to overthrow the government one benefit at a time. But I will say with fondness that he inadvertently helped me help other veterans by pressing me to find every loophole and exception to VA policy. Once in a while, I could even find something that he hadn't thought of yet. And then there was the bike. A lesser-known program under the category of vocational rehabilitation was a program called Independent Living, ostensibly to prepare a disabled veteran to prepare for engaging in training that would lead to employment. By the way, the VA has since revamped that program to narrow its focus, and I'm pretty sure it was due in no small part to Phil Ball. Because he managed to convince his voc rehab counselor to purchase many items for him, including mattresses, computers, and at one point, a bike. A few years passed, and he came to see me wanting my help to get the VA to pay for another bike, which was going to be difficult. And then, and I only know this because I looked back and I found the photo, because I'm in the habit of, my favorite part of this gig is talking with people. I hate paperwork, but I like people. And I like to help them get where they're going. But on September 11th, 2018, Phil came to see me, upset that the VA had denied his most recent request for a bike. In the end, I convinced him that with the amount of benefits that he was getting from the government, in quotes, that he surely would have enough to buy the bike of his dreams, and that he deserved it. A week later, he showed up at the courthouse, having ridden all the way from Fort Atkinson. It was like in the 90s that September. all the way from Fort Atkinson to show me his new bike. So, anyway, that's my little peephole into Phil's life.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Beth Garrett. I knew Phil just from these 4 years. He trained me how to work lunches here at the Carpe. And I'll tell you, these will be really fast. And then later,
Did you have to be retrained?
he was really good, actually. He bought the house directly across the street from me, here in Fort Atkinson. And it had belonged to a lovely artist named Rose, and she took meticulous care of it. And then a very brief time, this really metrosexual guy named, I think, Duke, and he took this beautiful home and had to paint every square surface, and then he painted it a second time. He owned the house for like 2 years. It's a really beautiful house. But he moved on, and then to my shock, Phil bought the house, which was great. And of course, I was used to Phil, and Phil at this time with his hair like this, and long beard, and the socks, and the Philness, just Phil. And I had heard of, Yvonne, you broke the ice here. I would walk out my door and I kind of like, oh no, Phil's outside, because if you had to get anywhere, it was like, you're not gonna make it. Because Phil was so friendly, he'd go across the street and talk, and it was great. And he was so friendly and so generous. He was a great neighbor. My kids were in high school by this time, but there was a big apartment complex that had been built behind us, and it was filled with mostly Spanish-speaking families. And they had darling little children, and I had a big swing set in my yard. And the kids kind of just assumed it was like their swing set. And I loved it, because my kids were getting older, and I would look out the window, and there were literally like 15 little kids swarming all over my swing set. And then Phil would come booking out of his house. He loved those kids. And he'd go over, and he said hi to them. He was a big guy. And the kids would be like, but he just loved chatting with kids. And, but I noticed after a while that the mothers in the apartment complex would slowly come out of the house when they saw that Phil was always over there. And so I ended up always pulling them aside and saying, he is a great guy. You don't have to worry about him. I will vouch for him. He is a great guy. And, but it did make me laugh, because he was kind of like a mother magnet, because they'd come over, time for lunch, and I think this went right over Phil's head, anyway, which is probably a good thing. But the other thing that I really thought was great, it was always interesting. The bike was funny, because when he got that bike, he was pushing his physical ability at that point, and he kept wiping out on that bike. So sometimes I would be, doing my dishes, and I'd see, oh, there's Phil bloodied again as he came up with his bike. So among everything else, he was often bandaged, but it was good when Carolyn moved in, because one of my favorite things to see before Carolyn moved in, he was a logical person, and he did love tools. And he used to take his leaf blower, and he would start on the upper floor of his house, and he would blast through his entire house right out the front door using the leaf blower. That was his method. I used to just love it. I'd be like, the leaf blower's going, and I'm like, and there's he's blowing everything right off the porch. How's the day, huh, Phil? It's like, yeah, this thing works great.
Okay, wait a second, Beth. Beth, come back here. The reason he moved into that house across the street was because I kicked him out of my house, which was across the street. He lived in my house for about a year. After living in a tent on a river somewhere, I don't know where, but Kitty, who I worked with and for a long time, 40 years, came up to me at one point, I think, and said, and stay for a little bit. Well, a little bit was a year. And by the way, a lot of kids like him, including mine. My daughter can't stand him because she hated that I had her take math from him. What? Mom, you're not going to stick me with him again this week. And then my son, who was 2-3 years old, running around with satchel all over the place, Phil would call him Boom Boom, because he would just go knocking into everything, knocking everything over, all over the cart. There goes Boom Boom. But then Boom Boom never wanted to leave the cart, so Phil had a ploy. He would go to Kylie and he'd say, "You can never leave the cart. You can never go home again. I want to go home!" And that's what Kylie, and he would call him the contrarian. So that was Phil, and then he lived with me, and I had a dog named Satchmo, an adorable chocolate lamb. I loved him so much. His name was Satchmo, but he wasn't my dog anymore after Phil moved in. Because then Satchmo would always go into Phil's bedroom, which used to be my daughter's bedroom, and lie with him on the bed. And I'd go in and say, "Phil, hello, Phil." And Satchmo would look at me like, "Wait a minute, you sleeping? Don't disturb him. I'll get you a cup of coffee." Fine. But the biggest thing, one of the biggest things Phil did while he was living with me is he spent his whole time on the goddamn computer, which actually didn't he always? But the whole time he was working on behalf of this vet he had met somehow in Texas, Arizona, I can't remember. And he was helping this vet to get his needs met that Phil figured out for himself, to do for himself, and got those needs met, and was able to do it for this guy down in Texas. And every day, Phil would tell me, "Well, I had a great connection with so-and-so today, and I think we're on a good road here, and I think he's finally, he's not laying in the lawn anymore. He's not in a sleeping bag on the lawn. I think he's got a place to stay now." And every day there was a new development for this vet that he would tell me about. And one last thing he did for me, okay, not one last, but anyway, one last thing I'll tell you, is that I got a new job for this company here in town called Cygnus Business Media. And they made me editor of this magazine called Ground Sport Worldwide. I didn't know what ground sport was. Well, it's just the stuff that supports the airplanes while it's on the ground. And Phil, my first job was to go and interview people at Rockford Airport at midnight to see what they did at night in the middle of winter. And I said, "Phil, I don't know what I'm doing." He said, "Don't worry about it. Get your coat on. We're going to go." And at midnight, he put me in the car. He drove me down to Rockford. And he said, "Come on, let's go." And he had the camera. He said, "I'll do the pictures. You do the interviewing. We got this covered." And that was my first story for a 5-year stint with this magazine. Thank you, Phil.
Speaking of computers, when Phil, basically, Phil died of his dementia and PTSD. And whenever Phil couldn't remember his password to his iPhone or his computer, well, instead of trying to figure out what it was, or he would go out and buy a new computer. So when I got to Phil's, he had like a couple of iPhones, he had 5 computers, and still didn't know the password. Oh, and Yvonne, regarding Phil.
Yeah, so this makes sense now.
again, what you find in all the scanned documents. So here's an article that says, newspaper article in the Wisconsin State Journal, May 14th, 1997. Fund that helps state veterans pay for education goes broke. And quoted in this article is no less than Phil Ball, comma, a Navy veteran taking correspondence courses in calculus, said he was notified of the delay until he called wondering about it. So the article goes on to talk about this controversy, and I'm just going to sum it up by the letter written to Phil from the State Department of Veterans Affairs that says, part-time study grant and retraining grant fund. As expected, WDVA, Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs, has received approval to continue funding the part-time study grant and retraining grant program for the remainder of the fiscal year. As you are aware, demand for these programs has exceeded our fiscal year 97 budgetary expenditure authority. Veterans approved with the part-time study grant, blah, 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 will be receiving checks within approximately 1 week. To meet anticipated demand for these programs in the next biennium, the governor's budget, blah, blah, blah. And I lost the, basically it says, you must know what buttons to push. So the Wisconsin Department of Veterans Affairs was giving Phil Ball, comma, Navy veteran, credit for getting this through the legislature and fixing that budget shortfall.
Yvonne, I kind of owe you an apology for, Phil giving you such a large work.
Were you sending to him to me? Good Lord.
Well, when I had Radical run on State Street, I just happened to run on Phil on State Street, and I asked him where he was living, right? And so I went over to his place. It was just one big room, and basically, Phil was starving. He's an ascetic, right? But he was starving. And I said, well, I asked him why, and he said, he had trouble with his feet. And Phil had Morton's neuroma. And at that time, the VA was not such great shakes because they tried to convince him that it was all in his head. And he spent 7 years until he got an MRI of his foot that showed he had Morton's neuroma, and finally got surgery for it. But in that 7 years, he couldn't stand on his feet. He really couldn't work. And when I saw his condition, I said, well, they were about ready to kick him out of it. He couldn't afford the rent. And I said, well, just come live with me, right? And he slept on the couch at my place for a year. But in that year, he studied everything about the VA. He went over everything. And at the end of the year, I think he was well equipped.
Well, he actually broke in 2 service officers before me, and I was just reading back through the case history of when you applied for the disability benefits, and there was a big change in the VA from the late 90s. The Agent Orange benefits were approved like in the 1999 to 2001 time frame, and that's about when he started getting connected. But then in 2003, there was a radical change in the usability of the VA hospital and things like that.
I can't say enough good things about the VA. They did federal records for Phil at the VA. But at that time, it was a different VA.
For sure.
Anybody else? Hey, Bob. Bob lives about 4 blocks from Phil when he was in Fort Atkinson.
Microphone. This brought me to Phil. One day I was working out my garage, and this guy was walking by on the sidewalk. Pretty soon he starts coming down towards me, smiling, and I got this vision like when Noah was told to build the ark, boompa, 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 Noah. Noah, what the hell is this about? Boompa, boompa, Noah, I want you to build me an ark. Phil had the message somehow that I was a veteran. He didn't know for sure, but he started talking to me about it, and he told him I was a veteran, and when I got out of service, I belonged to no organizations. I didn't know anything about the VA and benefits, but Yvonne, he is the one that educated me in everything. And
That's funny, because I deputize everybody that comes in my office. When they leave my office, I said, you are hereby deputized to go find me the next veteran. So it was you.
yeah, I was on. So we became friends over the years, and he did help me get through the process of getting my benefits, which I was entitled to. And so my life is different because of that. I just wouldn't be, especially the medical care. So I'm extremely thankful for that. But Phil, I just love to go over and visit Phil, and all I would have to do is ask a few questions, and I would be entertained for hours. Then if things were getting a little slow, then I'd come up with another question. So it was really just a great time. I just love that guy. And you talk about the bicycle. Phil, he helped me get the basic benefits which I was entitled to. And I was very thankful for that. I'm not a person that goes out and tries to seek things like big wheel bicycles. But Phil, when we'd be talking about something, maybe my old computer, he says, I think you could get one of those from the VA. And same way with the bike thing came up, he says, well, you could get one of those too. I'm trying to imagine in my head now, how can I get a bike for the VA? But he did it. I don't know he did it. So it was just wonderful. But he was the type of guy when I would go and visit him, I felt like I was the most important person in his life. I mean, that's the way he treated me. Then I started hearing about this Madison stuff and the political things he was in. And I'm thinking, this must have been some other man. This is Phil, the long-bearded guy here sitting in his pajamas or whatever. It's got to be somebody else, but I'm just fascinated with his life and how it went through those different phases. So, yeah, and if he helped the VA become what it is today, it's just a wonderful thing. I can't say enough good stuff about the VA. It's not only medical care, which is excellent, but it's also like a emotional healing thing. It's like you said, the movie The Band of Brothers. It's like a band of brothers, the service people. It's something you can't explain to anybody else what it's like. And I never started worrying anything about Vietnam until I was well retired, and it's a connection where you can connect with other veterans